Hi, I'm Helen Milner, the Chief Exec at Good Things Foundation, and I'm here for another episode of Digital Futures for Good. Digital Futures for Good is our 2024 conversation series where we talk to thought leaders about our society and how emerging technology and policy is coming together to create a world that we want for everybody and leaving nobody behind. Today, my guest is Nina Schick, who's a global leader in AI. She wrote a book called Deep Fake. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And Nina advises government and big companies around AI and emerging technologies and what we should do about it. So she's going to teach us a lot in this conversation. Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for being part of Digital Futures for Good.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So I saw you speak at Accenture's International Women's Day, and you're so inspiring. So I really wanted to get you onto the series. But tell me a bit about yourself. So where did you start? How did you even get into this game?
My route into AI has been kind of circuitous. I'm actually half Nepalese, half German. I grew up in Nepal, and I came to the UK many years ago, and I've always kind of been interested in geopolitics and politics. And I started after my study here in the UK working in Westminster. And it was at a time when there was a very obscure issue of the UK and the EU, which was just emerging. And of course, that kind of ended up becoming Brexit. So from that point onwards, I ended up working on huge political campaigns with various political leaders. And throughout a decade and a half of advising political leaders and working on elections and campaigns, the prevalent trend in my career was how technology and exponential technologies were emerging as this kind of macroeconomic force, not only shaping global geopolitics at a very high level, but also impacting the lives of billions of citizens around the world and changing society at a rate faster than anything we had ever seen before, right? When you consider the history of technology and how it impacts all of us as a society. So that's where I really started getting an interest in artificial intelligence, because it was still, in 2015, 2016, when I was looking at it, it's still kind of called data science, big data, and really kind of more the obscure remit of academics and researchers. And I started working with some of the kind of leading researchers and frontier labs because I just had a feeling that this was going to be a big deal. And for me, the story with AI really started when we started seeing these breakthroughs happening in 2016, 2017, when AI was able to do things that it hadn't been able to do before. And specifically, I'm now talking about the bit of AI that's called generative AI, AI that can create. And the first application of that was in non-consensual AI-generated pornography, because that's always, when it comes to technology, pornography is always the pioneering use case. So from that moment on, where I wrote the book on deepfakes, it's been a very interesting journey tracking how it's evolving so quickly. And initially, I was looking at it from a mis and disinformation perspective to now, I think, this conceptual understanding that we're at the cusp of almost like a new industrial revolution, where we are going to be able to produce intelligence. And it's going to have a tremendous impact, not only on how we work, but also how we live and society writ large. And in my view, what's happening now with AI, the best analogy when you think about how seismic the impact is the birth of modern computing itself, in the 1940s, and how the microprocessor, the computer, has completely transformed our economy, our world, our experience as individual human beings in a very short period of time. And the last thing I'd add to that is just off the gate, what we're seeing with developments in AI is that it's a lot faster than anything with kind of modern computing.
Absolutely. So much to unpack already. I'm sure we're going to talk about, obviously deepfakes, there's a lot of risk there, a lot of threat to society, but just thinking about all the benefits. So thinking 5 years, 10 years ahead, or even further, what do you think the real benefits are going to be to society through Gen AI?
So I always think that, I've kind of worked on the gamut of both sides of the problem. It's really interesting because I initially came at it from this is risky, because I was looking at deepfakes, synthetic content, the weaponization of information, the corroding information ecosystem, all kind of the dark underbelly, the societal impacts which we didn't expect when kind of, the age of the internet started. We thought it would be kind of a utopia where everybody would have access to information, and this would be, just an unmitigated good for humanity. And of course, over the past few years and decades, we've understood that there is unintended consequences and a way which these technologies can and will be weaponized. So that's initially where I started with AI as well. But really, when you start seeing the capabilities and the point where we're at now, where imagine, you can distill the trait that has always distinguished us from all other life forms. You're really talking about intelligence. And not because AI is somehow godlike or sentient or magical, but really if you just break it down to computational power and data, and now you have the ability to combine exponential computational power with so much data, and you can make decisions like that based on the computational power and the data, then if you crack intelligence, and you can really imbue intelligence through capable systems, then our entire understanding of what it means to be human and the challenges that are facing us is completely new. And one of the most exciting places I see this with AI is, for instance, in medical research, and I'm sure we can go into that. Yeah. But also there is huge economic activity, huge economic potential. And I think we will see a lot of growth. How that's distributed is another question. But for me, technology and technological progress has always been a driver of human ambition. And if you look at the history of technology, you see how general purpose technologies have elevated the human condition, right? And I think that there are some very exciting opportunities. Yeah. But this will inevitably be an age of disruption because the change is happening so much faster than anything we've experienced before. Yeah. And with that disruption, there is risk. People will be left behind, but there's also huge opportunity.
And those opportunities, you mentioned medicine. I mean, actually, didn't a Gen AI machine just come second in the world maths competition? So, and I heard that it was looking at so many different problems so quickly, whereas a human can never do that. So a human is just applying what they know over and over again. So in medicine, you said that there's a huge step forwards already.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really led to the breakthroughs we've been seeing, particularly recently, is how basically the architecture of so-called deep learning, it's a kind of field of artificial intelligence. And the really interesting thing about deep learning is that if the philosophical quest for artificial intelligence was, can we make machines as intelligent as or more intelligent than humans, one way to construct those machine learning systems was to construct complicated neural nets, which are based on the neural networks in our own brain. So you kind of take the biological structure for intelligence, and then you try to apply that within a machine. But until fairly recently, we didn't have enough computational power or data to run that. I mean, think about human intelligence. Think about how a child learns and develops. Think about how my children are 3 and 5, how in the first few years of their lives, my son is 3 now and he can speak fluently. And of course, just 3 years ago, he can say a word, he couldn't move, I'd have to do everything for him. And how many bits of data and information he's processed to be able to learn in that way, right? So again, taking that same kind of concept of processing data and information in the world around you is now a reality. And one of the things that's just been so phenomenal in deep learning is an architecture called transformers. And literally all that really means is that for the first time, we were able to decipher human language. Computers were able to decipher and understand human language. Now, what that means is that we can interact with machines simply by speaking to them. So if they have access to all this data and computational power, we can just ask what we want them to do for us or find for us. And that is really, really revolutionary. So in the field of something like medical research, for instance, and this is really where the whole world woke up to the astonishing capabilities of artificial intelligence, is the ChatGPT moment, right? When you had this interaction with a large language model, but just extending that capability where you have a system that can take lots and lots of data and understand human language. What we're starting to see in medical research, for instance, is you have extremely complicated data sets, for instance, where you're researching the human genome. So you can really take functional medicine to the next iteration. This is one of the hardest questions, right?
Yeah.
To understand biology. And now you have researchers who can apply a large language model over that data set and are able to query and understand the data in ways that weren't possible before. The other thing that we're seeing is that the scaling laws really apply to data. So again, if you look at medical research, where researchers are looking at the human genome, it turns out that if you have the data of 850 different species, so not even all humans, but because we're related somehow, having that data from other species helps us understand the human genome better. And the fact, again, that we have this rising computational ability to be able to churn through all of that, query all of that, and then speak and search through that data set in human language is part of what's leading to these astonishing breakthroughs.
Yeah. So taking it right back down to communities today in the UK, is that because a lot of that feels very much it's in the future, right? It's out there, whereas probably 6 months or 3 years away. But so as you know, at Good Things, we work with thousands of hyperlocal community organisations, really in the heart of quite disadvantaged communities across the UK. And they're all run by really amazing human beings, humbling human beings. And they're using ChatGPT and other tools right now to help people, for example, who are out of work, who are applying for work, to write a good cover letter.
Absolutely.
Someone else had, they were living in not a particularly great rented apartment with a leak. And they had written not a particularly good letter, had been ignored. And so actually ChatGPT actually helped them to compose a letter of complaint to get the leak fixed. And the leak was fixed. So actually, I think that one of the issues that we have is that AI and generative AI is very much in the media. And it's spoken about in a way of it's kind of going to create this wonderful or this fearful future. Whereas actually today, right now, people are using it. But people come in, so people who don't know how to use the internet particularly well are coming to these local digital inclusion hubs and saying, what is generative AI? What is artificial intelligence? Do I need to know about it? Which I think is actually a really great question. So it's not like, should I be scared of it or should I be using it? It's like, should I know about it? So what would you say to one of those people in those communities?
I'd absolutely say you should know about it. And using an interface like ChatGPT is already so practical to so many people from all different walks of life, regardless of your kind of socioeconomic background or status. So you mentioned, for instance, how in your communities, people are leveraging the power of a large language model to write letters that will materially help their situation. And they wouldn't have perhaps been able to do that before because they didn't have the access to the right information or, perhaps didn't know what tone they should adopt for the letter. But the fact that they can instruct a large language model to do that is really incredible. And one of the first and funniest applications I saw on a large language model when they first started merging is somebody basically created a ChatGPT bot called Do Not Pay. And it was if you were issued a parking ticket, and you know how frustrating those are, those fines. So you could basically just generate the legal letter and all the steps you needed to do in order not to pay that fine. But really what that means is we talk about how knowledge work is going to be automated. My husband is a lawyer, and I know that in certain knowledge industries, such as law, people are afraid that their jobs are going to be automated. But there's another way to look at it, and that is that actually services such as legal services, which are very expensive, hard to access, not available for people in disadvantaged communities, now suddenly are accessible through an AI interface. So that is something that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
And it's not only somebody in the community who doesn't know how to write a letter for the landlord. By the way, I've been doing lots of visa applications recently, and I'm using ChatGPT too, or other large language models, because it helps me speed up the process. It helps me, it's an enabler. right?
Yeah.
But you also see it, like I said, all the way to the end on the other spectrum, where you have highly sophisticated, educated biological researchers who are trying to unlock the secrets of the human genome, and they're able to query their data and query their research using the edifice of a large language model. So this is really people, when they ask you about AI, I mean, this is it, right? It is a meta technology which can be applied to anything.
Yeah.
And that's why you see people using a large language model to draft a letter, or using a large language model to do biological research. And that is just, again, coming back to this very philosophical and fundamental principle of intelligence itself, and how we can now leverage it through machines.
Yeah. And so now thinking of the fearful side, I mean, clearly, like you said, that's where you started. So where do you think we're going to end up on the side of, you said it's going to be disruptive. So one of the things that I worry about is our society. So, and I do realise that I often worry about our society in the UK, and I kind of realise when I start worrying about this is really about the global society. But who is really making the decisions about what AI does and doesn't do? So as you said, it started with pornography, with now solving genomes and detecting cancers, etc. But who's really making those decisions, and do they have our best interest at heart?
So obviously, when you think of cutting edge, pioneering AI research, industry is leading the way. And we've already seen over the past decade how expertise in artificial intelligence has moved out of academia, certainly not in government, into private industry, in part because it's so expensive to develop these frontier models. Now, I work with a lot of these researchers. I work with a lot of the companies who are leading the way. And I think it's unfair to say that they don't take very seriously the responsibility of developing these technologies. And perhaps that's also because we've been through a little bit of an iteration and learning curve when it came to the previous waves of information technology, specifically the internet and social media. We were perhaps a bit naive about the unmitigated good, and now we've seen that there's a way in which these technologies can be weaponized. And there's already a sense off the bat that, okay, this technology can and will be weaponized, which is why when we're only in the first inning, it's been fascinating to see the global policy debate, and also fascinating to see how every single country in the world wants to be engaged in the AI safety conversation, right? And that all kind of happened in 12, 18 months after the release of ChatGPT. But I would say, so it's the concern about AI killing us all or automating all the jobs, or the existential risk argument has been so overinflated that it's almost become a distorted narrative in the media. And I think the risks have much more to do with how are bad actors going to leverage and weaponize these capabilities, right? And this is where my research with deepfakes came in, where now it's, if you're a bad actor, it's so easy to create synthetic content, to hurt communities, like in the case of non-consensual pornography of women and minors. These are where we're really seeing the real world kind of harms. So it's less to do, in my view, with existential risk and autonomous machines taking over the world. But, technology, as it always has been, will be leveraged both for good and for bad. But the other risk is very much an accessibility question. And I think there's two parts to this question, because there's no doubt that the cutting edge research and infrastructure is dominated by a few players in the field. In part because it's so expensive to do. There are so few people in the world who know how to build these models. And even with the best of their intention, they might be biased. They might be building that into their systems. And the impact is so disproportionately large, right? And already now you see how, if you look at the most valuable companies in the world, for instance, 7 of them are US companies and they're AI companies, right? And their technology and their products and their stack and the infrastructure, the physical and digital infrastructure that they're building and developing is going to impact billions of people around the world. So that is kind of a problem when it comes to accountability, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, you could also make the argument that the products and the services and the infrastructure they're developing are so empowering to those who are so far left behind. And the real life example I will give of that, having grown up in Nepal, my mother grew up in a village in Nepal in the 1960s at a time when, there was no formal education, there was no infrastructure, there was no access to running water, and girls, basically 90% of the population was illiterate. And within a generation, that entire community has completely transformed, not because government is super corrupt and there's no kind of state provision. But the community has been able to empower itself through the use of modern technologies. And it's startling to see how much of an enabler and empowerment that has been in a community that would have been one of the most marginalized, disenfranchised, and economically left behind communities of the world. So it's both. So, on one hand,
but just on that example, has that driven literacy? So
absolutely,
is they now 90% literate, or
it wouldn't be as. I don't know the stats off the top of my head. I mean, we could look it up, but it literally would be something close to that. From 90% illiterate to now, I would expect almost only the most marginalized communities would not be sending their daughters to school as well. Now it's boys and girls being sent to school.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And technology has a role because it's made the world a smaller place. So because of their access to information, to online learning, to knowledge. Is that why it's made it possible?
I think that's right. Access, I mean, in the case of Nepal, again, it was, the population was such a high literacy rate because the government or the regime for hundreds of years had made it a priority to keep kind of the foreign world out, and they wanted to keep the population illiterate as a means of control, right? So when you think about the classic censorship model, it was no access to information, and thereby we're going to control the population and it was very effective. And of course, once you have modern information technology, you're no longer able to do that. And people are able to create their own kind of businesses online or able to understand, how can I go abroad? How can I take a step up in life? And in a country like Nepal, that's where most of the economic growth comes from. It's from remittances from a community that's all living abroad. And you see these stories where within a generation, in my case, my mother grew up in a village with no electricity, and here I am in London today.
Yeah. Talking about AI and emerging technologies,
exactly.
Right? It's absolutely fantastic. So just thinking about the society that we live in. So Martha Lane Fox was on this series before, so she was on an earlier episode. And one of the things that Martha said previously is that in the early days when she was working in the World Wide Web, she was a great believer that the World Wide Web was going to level up society. And she didn't look at it now, it's owned by a handful of white guys. And so do you think that because of things like natural language models, like we were saying, being able to use chat GPT just with your own language, will democratize society? Do you think that there's that potential that it will level up?
So I think it's this paradox, which we've already made reference to, because on one hand, there's no doubt that there are a few monolithic players in the space who are going to capture so much of the immense value, right? And if you look at those 7 companies, the most valuable companies in the world, being US companies, being tech and AI companies, I mean, the CEO of any one of those companies is arguably already more powerful than the president of the United States, right? In terms of impact about how their product shapes and changes lives of billions of people around the world, in terms of economic prowess, in terms of leading the industry. But on the other hand, it is also true. I mean, we could all sit here and be like, those guys are bad because they're not accountable and there's some truth to that. There has to be some accountabilities. On the other hand, it does democratize, and it does democratize access to intelligence and democratize access to information. And you already mentioned how you're seeing that in your community. I mentioned how the precursor to artificial intelligence, the birth of the internet and social media has had a transformational impact on my community in Nepal. And I see this, with my family and everybody else kind of from the village setting. And I would argue that from a socioeconomic perspective and perspective about the chances that the opportunities they had in life have gone up tremendously because of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's this weird paradox where, like I said, on one hand, the core infrastructure and the value is captured by an elite few, but the ecosystem and the capabilities truly are democratized. And again, we're only in the first inning, right? Yeah. We're only in the first inning. But I'm really excited to see how people from certain disadvantaged countries or disadvantaged situations will leverage the power of AI to they won't no longer need some of the kind of vestiges of institutional prestige, whether that's a degree or whether that's access to certain organizations, whether that's financial capabilities to be able to achieve something that just wouldn't have been possible before in terms of, did they go to the right university? Yeah. Did they have enough money to pay the course? So I think you will see this generation of entrepreneurs and people who are successful with leveraging these capabilities. But that all comes down to mindset. You will, of course, see many people who are left behind. And the point that you made about the biases and the large language models being built by a small group of people. Yeah, that's a really important geopolitical question. That's why you see in certain parts of the world how governments have made it a national priority to start building their own foundational models. Because why should all large language models be based in the English language? So you've seen how, instance, in the Gulf states, and of course they have access to a lot of capital, have made it a national priority to build large language models in Arabic. And, places like India, where you have so many different dialects and different languages, should be doing it too. Or in Brazil. And kind of you don't what I see lacking with certain governments is that kind of initiative and understanding.
And I was going to ask you actually about what role does government play? Can government catch up? Clearly they don't have the money to invest in the way that some of these companies are investing. So what role of government, and that, a lot of them are talking about regulation, is regulation what the government should be doing?
Regulation is part of a bigger piece, I think, of the bigger piece of the pie. And of course, regulation is necessary and it's good, and there has to be accountability. Yeah. And, you can almost kind of roll our eyes a little bit when you saw how when, in the US Congress, they were having hearings on AI and they were getting all the kind of titans of tech to come in. They're just like, wow, tell us how to regulate this. And, they kind of... And policymakers are catching up, even though there is like this wide chasm between industry and regulatory bodies and policymakers. So regulation is an important piece. But I also think that there's a huge opportunity here. And I actually think, if you think about the macroeconomic situation in the world and the way that global geopolitics are playing out in the 21st century, this is going to be one of the biggest drivers of geopolitics in the 21st century. Yeah. And I actually think that the United States, putting aside their crazy politics, but looking at the unique kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem, the unique access to funding, to VC, and just cold, hard technological prowess is going to manifest in, economic power. And I think we're going to continue to see some of those. You're going to see certain parts of the world that are really able to leverage this and translate it into geopolitical power. And that competition between China and the US, I think, is going to continue to play out.
So what does that mean for little old UK then?
Little old UK. Well, I used to work on Brexit, so that was always kind of the the dream of the Brexiteers, right? That little UK would become closer to the US, or would be working like a bridge between the US and the rest of the world. I think the UK punches above its weight because we have excellent institutions, academic institutions, excellent research facilities. But, we have to do things like continue to invest in R&D, consider tax breaks or tax incentives for startups, consider our immigration laws to make sure that kind of those who are really relevant to these industries are able to come and live and work here. And, the UK has a challenging kind of economic outlook, but, and all these geopolitical questions like access to energy resources. I mean, this is huge, right? It all kind of ultimately comes down, when you boil it down, to huge geopolitical questions around energy security, infrastructure. Are we investing in digital infrastructure? And you'll probably know more about the state of the UK's digital infrastructure than I do. But
I mean, I think the good news, I think in the UK we have a lot of innovators. We have entrepreneurs. I think we now, with the new government, have a government who understand that technology has to be a fundamental building block in the country's future. I don't know what they're thinking around AI. I mean, the actual connectivity infrastructure still needs to be, there's gaps that still need to be filled in. And a bit like everything with technology, there's the haves and the have-nots. So, there's places where you have multiple choices about who you want to buy your connectivity from, and other parts of the country you don't. And we also have 6 out of every 10 graduates come to London to work. Right?
It's very distorted in the UK.
Very, very distorted. And therefore, if you think about, if we're actually talking about technology levelling up the world, actually, we've got lots of communities across the UK that are not at all part of that future and don't believe that they're part of that future. So making sure that we've got the technology infrastructure, that we're thinking about how technology can drive opportunities for everybody. I definitely think we've got a government now that believes in that. So I guess it's just how do they square that circle with the investment that they can make, but also partner with companies and with the universities to make sure that they are 5 steps ahead, so that they can make sure that they're planning for the future. So, we're obviously it's very new, the government in the UK, but I'm feeling very optimistic about their approach to technology. And also they now have ministers on the cabinet who understand technology, who've worked in technology companies. I think that always helps.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's generational. And one thing that I do worry about, you said that the robots are not taking our jobs, but in the last industrial revolution, there was a mass unemployment. And then after there was a lost generation where there was mass unemployment, and then society, recalibrated. They built a few more factories, and those new jobs for the next generation came about. Do you think we've got the wherewithal to anticipate where those negative trends are going to be in our society, in our communities, and to put enough forethought in to make sure that doesn't happen to our people?
I think, when you consider automation and job automation, and that is so often the headline around AI, and anyone who says there isn't going to be labor market disruption or that it's only going to be a net good, it's not true. There will be jobs that are going to be automated. I don't know if we do have the wherewithal as a society to prepare for that, especially if you're thinking about it from a top-down, government needs to do something about this perspective. So if you can't rely on the government to prepare for it, then what you can do is prepare by empowering yourself, by doing what you're already doing in the community. So you can't only wait for a top-down approach, but there has to be a bottom-up, community-led approach, because ultimately, like I said, if you have the right knowledge and if you have the right mindset, this is tremendously exciting as an enabler, right? It will, I think the way that we think about work itself has to change. And I talk about this to my husband all the time because our kids are almost 3 and 5. And
it's their future, right?
Exactly. But also the kind of advice we were giving when we were growing up and being told, get a professional job in an organization and then maybe you'll be an employee for life and you'll be sorted. That is completely changed. And I see that in my career.
Yeah.
I mentioned I grew up in Kathmandu. I ended up here and then I ended up kind of creating my own business and becoming able to do research in something that really, really fascinated me. That wouldn't have been possible without the internet. It wouldn't have been possible without social media. And I'm super excited for how AI tools, when already you think about, okay, we talked about how it's helping biological researchers unlock the secrets of human DNA, but we already talked about how in the community, it's helping people draft letters, which would have been so out of their reach before. So when you start applying it as an enabler, and the thing is, like I said, we're only in the first innings, right?
Yeah.
And the world that we're going into, people talk about this in AI research, is a increasingly agentic world, meaning you can think about your AI capabilities as your personal agent, right? So you have like your assistant because you can already do this in the context of kind of knowledge work. And we're at Accenture here today, and I'm sure that they are building very sophisticated large language model capabilities within their offerings to their clients and also within how they run their own organization internally. So you can talk about it within the context of a huge global business, but you can also consider it in the context of how empowering it can be from a consumer's perspective, especially because these capabilities are going to become more and more accessible. You won't need to have a supercomputer. You can run it on your smartphone, right? So if you think about having your own AI agent that you can instruct, and already we're starting to see the beginnings of that. So if you use Google, for instance, to run your email, you can already get their Gemini assistant. You can be like, dig through my emails and find me this. Or just book my travel and do that. Or I need to see a doctor about X. Can you give me recommendations? I'm in London. So almost any challenge or question or query, you can give it to your AI agent. And increasingly, we're going to have this world where AI agents just negotiate with AI agents. So this infrastructure, which will be by design, but also will become the de facto reality. So I think what we will see is entire companies that are basically run by a small group of people, right? So lots of economic opportunity with few resources, being able to leverage that, and also kind of seeing how some of the most challenging questions facing humanity we can begin to make steps towards cracking that with AI. So I'm very excited about how, with the right conceptual understanding and without fear, because there is so much distortion around the AI debate, how this can be such a tool of empowerment for even those who are the most disenfranchised.
So one of the ways I look at the digital divide, because obviously the mission at Good Things is to fix the digital divide, to close the digital divide. But as it narrows, it's also deepening. So the people who are left behind are left further and further behind as the opportunities of the internet and technology is taken for granted by everybody else. Do you think that agency, that empowering, can truly be felt by everybody?
So let me throw another question back to you. What is the biggest challenge with regards to the digital divide? What is the biggest factor that leads people to be left behind and then fall further behind?
So it's compound poverty, financial poverty, and lack of opportunity to date. So not having had an opportunity at school to do well at school, to develop an inquiring mind, for example, that may well result in not having any qualifications or not having good qualifications, which then leads to unemployment or insecure employment, so in and out of employment, 0-hour contracts. You probably also will have insecure housing, and therefore things like even just buying connectivity is not really open to you, and then compound with poverty. So if financial poverty. So if you don't have enough money, so obviously we see people who can't afford any kind of connectivity. So we provide free mobile connectivity because people they don't have £10 for pay-as-you-go for a top-up. So that they literally are living, I was going to say hand to mouth, like they are using food banks, they don't have food. And so it's all of that compounds. So you're not in a job where you're learning about how to, what the internet is, how to use it to your benefit. You may have a smartphone, but you may not be able to afford the connectivity all of the time. And so it's really about, it's partly about mindset. You mentioned mindset earlier, is that some of the people who do have a smartphone and can just about afford the connectivity, they use 5 to 7 apps or websites ever in their life. We've probably used more than that today. So that they are using the things that the social media, maybe email. So they're using the few things that they know how to use as a benefit to them, but they're not going and exploring and looking for the rest of that. So always when we see people who are using the services of the digital inclusion hubs in the community because they can't afford it because they don't have money, we always want to make sure that they're guided towards some support to learn how to keep themselves safe on the internet so they don't fall victims of scams, or that they can learn how to use email or search in a more sophisticated way. And if they're lucky, then they may well be supported to do things like learn that ChatGPT exists, and that can help them. So there's no one reason, but really those people at the bottom of that divide have no money, and they have no agency. They don't have confidence and self-esteem. And they also are living within communities where there's lots of people like them. So that's why actually working with them in their communities is so fundamental. And the people who run the local charities, local community centres, they're from those communities as well so often. So they can really help them to understand what their journeys are. Quite often the volunteers and tutors there are people who have been on that journey as well. And so to shine a light, I think, on the way out of digital exclusion, but obviously you need to make sure those building blocks of, you've got some kind of device, you've got some kind of connectivity, and you know some fundamental building blocks of skills.
So much of what you're saying, it's not a technology problem,
no.
Right? It's, you said, the lack of an inquisitive mind, which starts from the youngest age, from education, what kind of educational resource you have. Did you have a teacher that taught you that you could inquire? And I mean, that's one of the most interesting things for me around these exponential technologies, and for you and your communities as well, about this quest for continuous learning, and that there isn't just a very prescribed paradigm of how you can be successful in life. It's much more to do with what are your expectations for life? What do you think because now you can do more than you ever could do before with less resources, but you have to have that kind of spark of inspiration. You have to believe that, you have the confidence to want more for your life, to understand that you can do more. And to me, that starts with pedagogy and education. And that's a whole nother...
and belief and opportunity.
Yes.
And, so I'm a massive optimist. So I think that's why we do the work that we do, because we believe that we can add value. We can work in partnership to shine that light, to get that goal.
Absolutely. And this is why the bottom-up and top-down approach need to work together. Absolutely. I think government needs to reassess pedagogy and education and subsidize access to devices, make sure that the kind of infrastructure and connectivity is there. But you need people such as yourselves to work in the community and work with those who are most marginalized to help them understand. So it's kind of this meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you think about technology, that I'm optimistic as well, that technology will become ever more intuitive to use. That obviously we can already speak to our devices. And it can automatically translate. So quite a lot of the people that are supported in the community have English as a second language and might not speak English particularly well, but that won't matter because they'll be able to ask the computer, the device, questions in their own mother tongue?
Absolutely. So because I grew up internationally, I grew up with 5 languages, but I speak 7. But I married a Brit, and you guys are very monolingual. So my kids only speak English. So it's always been, I'm like, ooh, well, I'm like, it's okay. When my kids grow up, they'll just have like a device, and that is where they can just do instant translation, right? And that again is so empowering when I think about somebody like my mother.
Yeah.
How would she deal with bureaucracy or paperwork in Germany or the UK in a language that she wouldn't be able to read or understand? Well, the fact that you can just run it through a large language. But again, you need to know that that's possible.
But so we need the technology to be better.
Yeah.
And the interfaces to be better, and the people designing those interfaces to design them for people like your mother, like the people that we help in communities. And then you need humans to believe that we can make the society more equal.
And I think that's the most important, because when you talk about the interface being built, for instance, to benefit certain marginalized communities, that's what is one of the most incredible things about this technology being democratized, because fine, you have like these monolithic companies who are building, if you think about the stack, they build the infrastructure, they build the platform, but then on top of that, anybody can build applications. Yeah. And it's unbelievable you talk to people who are building applications for, I'm sure for refugees and migrants to help them with understanding their visa and their paperwork, all the way to the people who are building applications on top of that stack to understand and interpret the language of whales. So you see incredible communities and initiatives who are leveraging and accessing this new platform for intelligence and using it not only to unlock some of the most interesting questions in biology or science, but actually to help others as well. But this is why I keep coming back to the mindset, right? Yeah. To understand that, and that's perhaps the most challenging question. The most challenging question isn't the technology itself, and will it develop at a pace where the interface is easy and intuitive? Yes, but how do people understand that they can use it and use it to materially make a better life for themselves?
And that's where real partnership and real collaboration. So we've got the big businesses who've got the deep pockets. We've got governments who hopefully understand that there's potential and they need to be embracing it and harnessing it. And then you've got charities in the third sector who can actually bring a citizen view of it as well. So I'm always optimistic we can bring everybody together and we can create a wonderful world. But I am optimistic that we can have greater democratization. I think, though, as I said earlier, the globalization piece is that we've got to think about how we exist within the whole world, right? I want the poor community that I visited yesterday to have a better life, but I also understand that we exist within a bigger world, and a big world that has all kinds of inequalities, but also other challenges and threats like climate change. So, we've got plenty of things that we can get these clever computers to fix.
Plenty.
So, Nina, at the end of every conversation for Digital Futures for Good, I ask the same question. So, in this imaginary world that you are going to become the Prime Minister of the UK, you can always become the US President if you prefer.
I can't. I wasn't born there.
So, you're the Prime Minister of the UK, and so in your first 100 days, what would you do to fix the digital divide?
So absolutely invest more in infrastructure and accessibility, maybe by subsidizing access to devices. Second, rethink education wholesale. That's a big one. Yeah. We have to rethink pedagogy itself. If you're seeing these frontier models, and again, we're only at the very beginning, which on already any standardized test relating to human intelligence or reasoning already outperform or do better than humans. So rethinking kind of, well, what should education look like? And should we judge children just on standardized testing? Yeah. It's more about how can we, going back to that mindset, how can we develop the next generation in a way that they're resilient, that they're flexible, that they have the... I think the people who are going to do really well are those who are more able to deal with change and who are entrepreneurial. So fostering that from the youngest age. And then finally, as a business owner, there needs to be more in terms of R&D and tax credits and benefits for those who want to invest and build and bring in the right team to develop these technologies, and for industry and government and community to work together because it's interdisciplinary.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we're working closely with the new government, so we'll make sure that they hear your 100-day plan and maybe they can take it on board. So thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for helping us on our journey.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.